All right, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to episode 2 of Stick Talk. Here with Dan, Christian, my co-host, and Jennings in the guest chair for today. So welcome to the show, bro. Jennings DePriest.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. This is my first podcast.
This your first podcast?
Yes, my first podcast. I've been on
awesome.
radio before. I've never been on a podcast.
And I think Scott, he's behind the camera, but Scott, was that your first podcast with us on the first episode? Yeah. All right. Well, so a bunch of first podcast appearances to get us started, which is
we're getting the guests that nobody else can. That's
yeah. So we're excited to dive in. We met Jennings through our coaching program, Client Ascension, initially, and then we ended up meeting up in Sarasota area, which is like an hour south of Tampa, to play a little golf earlier this year. And then we just kind of bonded over our love for cigars. The Republican Party, politics. Just gonna dive right into this head first, and yeah, I mean, Christian, Dan, you guys have a question you want to get us started with, or?
Yeah, let's just start it off by an intro, because I feel like you have one of the most interesting digital business offers I've ever heard. You operate in the niche or the industry with the deepest pockets, which is government. So props to you. If you just want to give, a little background into how you got into online business, how you got to the point you're at today, and any pivots you made along the way.
Yeah, so I am a professional propagandist, is probably the best way to describe this. Little bit of background, started my career as a lobbyist. I was in the National Guard at the time as an enlisted infantry guy. When I commissioned, I became an intel officer and got super into targeting. And while I was at intel school, I decided that I wanted to leave the lobby firm that I was at. I went in-house for a client, and they were like, oh, you'll do sales development. It's basically the same thing as lobbying. We're selling to the government, and you'll write out your non-compete like that. Well, what I quickly found out was they didn't have any marketing. It's really hard to sell if they have a bad website, no real social media presence. It's kind of what Wizard talks about all the time, like,
Wizard.
You can't close deals because nobody knows that you exist online. So I started learning Facebook ads. I started learning ClickFunnels. Shout out to any people who started on ClickFunnels and have since moved on to better platforms. But that's how I got my start. And long story short, once my time under non-compete was up, I made some friends who wanted to use digital advertising to influence legislators. My very first Facebook ads campaign in the political space was running Facebook ads where if somebody clicked on it, it would call a state senator. And we sent hundreds of phone calls into like a handful of state senate offices overnight. We got the bill killed thanks to the calls, and I was hooked from that point. So from there, I've had really good mentors. I learned how to do direct SMS for political campaigns. So if you live in Florida and you've gotten political text, there's a good chance I'm behind it. Sorry, not sorry. And
yeah, if you get on his bad side, he'll opt you into every single text.
And everyone has its
sent.
own opt-out identity. So yeah, how many texts did you get that day?
Probably 20. I'm like, what database is my phone number on? And I'm like, oh, Jennings.
Yeah, I did it to my dad too. That was actually pretty funny. And I put in his name in the system as Dad. So when they were using first names, it would say, "Thank you, Dad. This is blank with blank candidate." And
so if someone I don't like that might not be in the same party as your candidates, can I just give you their number?
I'm not saying that that's
not publicly. Why are you asking him on a podcast?
I'm not saying that that's not an offer. I might put that in the Client Ascension raffle next year. Is add the phone number of your choice to every texting campaign for 2024.
All right. So just to kind of set the pace for the episode. So today is Veterans Day, and Jennings is a veteran, and we're going to talk a lot about America. We're going to talk a lot about politics. We're going to talk also a lot about business because it all kind of intertwines with the work that Jennings does. But really interesting, you mentioned like ClickFunnels specifically, which we use at our business. That's kind of the funnel that got us into online business, into selling products online. And this is just like a personal story, I guess. But when I first started on ClickFunnels, they'd put out a bunch of resources showing you like the most successful funnels. And one of the examples that they had in like that PDF was actually like Barack Obama using ClickFunnels to fundraise for his campaign. So I guess talk a little bit about how like marketing and politics all comes into play, and maybe what your biggest lessons have been since like working for political campaigns, because it's really all the same.
Yeah, I remember seeing that too, and that's when I started to make the click of like, oh, marketing applies to politics as well. And a lot of that had to do with old style politics and some of the older consultants out there who I love, and they've been great mentors over the years, still really believe in direct mail, which, I mean, you guys know I do direct mail too, but the direct mail I do is slightly different. And they still really believe in like TV and radio. And so trying to talk to them about the targeting abilities that we have digitally has been a little bit hard. But the biggest thing for politics taking over into like a normal marketing campaign, right? Unlike normal marketing on the political side, I don't just get to sell my product. I don't just get to sell my candidate or my issue. I get to trash the other candidate or issue too, which is like probably my favorite part. And while you can't do that, it teaches a really important lesson about targeting and why targeting is so important. I think it's so common for people to be like, offer, 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 offer. And the offer is important, but really it matters that you know who your target is. A great example of this, I sent out a text this cycle about a candidate who lost by 16 points. And
Not your candidate, right?
not my candidate. It was my candidate's opponent. And the way we structured it was we were talking about how our candidate's opponent was this hardcore right-wing MAGA Republican, which he had made enough posts that we had like the backup, right? Because we can get sued if we say something that's untrue. We had enough there to say this. Well, the red wave happened, so that could have been really bad, but we only texted it to Democrats. So we texted this to all the Democrats saying that this guy is a hardcore MAGA Republican. Not with the purpose of, hey, we're going to get this guy elected, but hey, we're going to make sure that the Democrats don't show up and vote for him. Because we saw the polling numbers, the writing on the wall was he was pulling enough Democrat votes where if he pulled a handful of MPAs in, we could have been in a bad place. So you have to think more about your targeting. And I feel like there's so many people who are like, it's offer, it's copywriting, it's the message. And like, yeah, it is, but your message has to connect with your target. If you don't know who your target is, or you have terrible targeting, right, which is the other thing I see all the time in politics and in marketing, is people are like, oh, I'm just going to put this out there. It's like, no, like, let's talk about targeting. Let's talk about like reaching the right people with your dollars. Because even if it's more expensive to reach somebody in a targeted manner, it's going to save you money in the long term because you're not getting on bad sales calls. You're not, you're not getting an email list full of people who can't afford to buy you.
Yeah, it's kind of like the cold email strategy that we teach to people in our coaching program, and what we also implement for our clients is like the order in which you put together an effective marketing campaign or cold email campaign is it has to start with identifying the target market. Like, who are you actually speaking to? Because Christian, he does the copywriting at our agency, and how would he be expected to write effective copy if he doesn't know who it's being written for? And so I think that's a great takeaway right there, is like start with identifying who this is actually for. Who are you trying to speak to? And maybe, Christian, you could talk about how that funnels into writing good copy.
Yeah, so the best example I can give, I always go back to e-com because it's such a popular niche to go after. Say you want to go after brands for email marketing, and you write copy that's directed to any brand in the world. It's going to be relevant to every brand, but no brand is going to be interested enough to want to get back to you. Well, I shouldn't say no brand, but not enough brands to make an impact for your business. On the other hand, if you go after, let's say women's jewelry brands that are headquartered in California, and you're from California, you could write a piece of email copy that says, love supporting, jewelry brands here in my home state of California. Checked out your website, love what you're doing. I'm curious, are you looking for anyone to help with your Klaviyo strategy? that just builds trust. It builds credibility, shows that you did your research, and then it's going to get you that conversion. So I guess, Jennings, how does this, what I'm talking about with like the copy for email marketing, Klaviyo to ecom, how does that correlate into writing a political text to people to either get your audience to vote for someone or to not vote for someone? Like, what do you say in the copy that's going to make someone that's reading it go, oh shoot, I need to vote for this person, or oh shoot, this person sucks, kind of deal?
Yeah, it really comes down to a handful of things. On a macro level, we're looking at polling data, right, for the issues that are most important. And it's really important to have good polling, which is why, most of the time I'm not running a race by myself. I'm coming in as the texting consultant, as the digital consultant, as the ads consultant. So I have great GCs to work with, general consultants, who have good polling data. And big difference between one of the best GCs in the state, who I'm fortunate enough to work with, and a GC who was less than qualified to run the race that we were working on. He came in at the last minute, brought me in to help save the race. The polling data just wasn't there. So the poll that they had floated didn't mention affordability at all, which affordability was the #1 issue in the nation across parties. So we drove the word affordability on every single political text this cycle. Like, you didn't have a text that came out of me that didn't say affordability.
Right. So that's like the most relevant pain point for every single person.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's at a broad level, right? There are great systems where you're able to cross-reference political data with consumer data. Like, hey, this person has a subscription to like car magazines or boat magazines, or this person also has a hunting license. Like, this person subscribes to the NRA's list. And then you can get really targeted on, like, this person wants to take away your guns.
So last thing, if you have a list of people that like hunting, you could write a text that said XYZ candidate, loves hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's...
We can even do, the cool thing about texting is we can do smart dynamic fields in it, just like you can for emails, where you can have like custom messages, kind of like first lines, but like specific pain points for like, hey, these people are over 65, so we're going to talk to them about like retirement and fixed income. Or, this person has a hunting license, so we're going to talk to them about hunting, and do that all in the same campaign.
Super interesting. Daniel, the wizard that Jennings mentioned earlier in the episode, our business partner, Daniel Fazio, who we run Client Ascension with, he talks about this all the time. And it's how he's kind of like formulated his YouTube strategy. Like, he'll watch videos and look at people that he wants to work with or thinks that they're a good fit for our program. And he'll listen to like the specific terms or the words that they use and then use that in our marketing copy. So like, we run a coaching program for agency owners. That's what we refer to them as, agency owners. But what Daniel discovered this week is not everyone knows what an agency is, and not all of our potential students identify as agency owners. So what did he do? Well, he changed the copy to B2B service providers. He changed the copy to consultants, to coaches, to SDRs, to be more inclusive of like all the types of people we can work with. And this week we saw like an instant boost in opt-ins, calls booked, conversions. And so it's really fascinating to me to see like the correlation between the work you do and the work that we do. Like, politics and marketing is all the same.
One interesting difference though is I feel like the barrier to entry is much higher for what you're doing. Like, you had to work in there for years. You're also a veteran, which probably helped to break into that industry. Whereas like with cold email, we just started up an agency, had no credibility. We get them on the phone. We're like, oh, if we can get you on the phone, why can't we get your customer on the phone? Like, very easy to just like spin up an offer, send out emails, hop on a call, close the deal. Can you talk about, I guess, just like working in an industry with the plan of becoming like an entrepreneur and a leader in that industry? Or was it not ever part of your plan? Did you kind of just like stumble into it after working there for a couple of years?
So my plan was always to be a partner at a lobby firm. That's what I wanted from the moment I decided that I wanted to go into politics. I had my late aunt, who was like a mother to me, was a partner at a lobby firm. That was the dream, right? What I found out was the lifestyle wasn't there. And what I mean by lifestyle is when you're a lobbyist in Florida, Florida has a 60-day legislative session. You work really, really intensely for 60 days. And then the rest of the year, some lobbyists like work really hard and they develop business, and then some lobbyists drink the rest of the year. And it wasn't ever a conscious decision of I'm going to start my own thing. It was a decision of like, I have these opportunities in front of me. But to your point with the barrier to entry, everyone who gets started in politics works for free. Like, I started working for free on the Romney campaign back in 2016? No, 2012. 2012. Cold calling for Romney and knocking doors for Romney. Like, that in, like, low level in a Tallahassee office, not, like, anything fancy or dramatic. I got to meet, like, Mitt Romney's son was, like, the highlight of my campaign at a tailgate, which was pretty cool. But there's definitely a barrier to entry there. And I mean, it's taken me 10 years of working with some people to get them to be like, yeah, we're going to do texting now. Like, we're going to do these things with you now. You've been talking about them forever. You know, one of the top consultants in the state who I've considered a mentor and a friend for a long time, just started using me for texting this cycle. Like, and it takes a while because, one, you have to prove you're competent and you're trustworthy and all of that. And two, the business is on 2-year cycles. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I had a crazy month this month. I had a crazy month last month, but there's not going to be a lot of political issues. There's local issues. There's some state level issues that I get involved in that aren't campaigns, but it's still a very cyclical business, which is why why I'm building out some of my offers with, like, hey, direct mail for businesses, or we've done SMS campaigns for businesses, mainly because I get bored in the off season. It's probably the hardest part about working in politics.
Interesting. So I guess follow-up question to that, like, if somebody else wanted to get into politics, if they came in with the intention of like, hey, I want to run a business that does digital marketing for politicians, is there any shortcuts? Or is it kind of just like, hey, you really just have to put in the time to create that credibility? So
I'm actually really tempted to test this because I haven't done any marketing for myself and for my own business. It's all been direct relationships and direct referrals is how I've built everything. There are some groups of political consultants out there that are basically like associations for consultants. And I think Limlist, that software took that list and did a lot of cold email outreach to try and build their business out. And I think I have the testimonials now to really drive that. But the best way to get into politics, and I get asked the question all the time, how do you get into politics? Go show up at a local race and knock doors. Like, I have a case study now that kind of shows that door knocking is not as effective as everybody said for years, myself included. But nothing convinces a candidate that you're all in for them like going and sweating and knocking doors in the Florida heat.
Yeah, along the same lines, I feel like the topic of networking is magnified and just made way more important in politics. I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I feel like in politics, it's like who you know, connections, political connections. So how do you personally, and then how can anybody just, like you were mentioning before, like make the connections, build the high level relationships with people that refer you business and just really make a name for yourself outside of the blood, sweat, and tears like you kind of just mentioned?
I forget who talked about this at the Client Ascension event, but somebody talked about don't be a weirdo. It could have been Brian.
Yeah, it was Brian.
Yeah, it was Brian. Yeah, don't be a fucking weirdo. Like,
no, that was his
excuse my
exact
French.
quote.
I'm trying to stop swearing so much. But like, so many people are just weird. Especially in politics, man. Like, there are so many people who, because by the way, making money in politics, yeah, it's kind of an elite class, right? But anybody can get involved in politics. Anybody can show up in an REC meeting, regardless. Republican Executive Committee. It's like the low-level local party. Yeah. Anybody can show up there, and there's weirdos who show up. And I think you also have to like really take into account like what you're trying to do. Because are you trying to win races or are you trying to make money? And if you come into a networking environment with like, oh, I'm here to build my business and I'm here to, like, you're going to turn people off.
Yeah.
Like, you need to go out you need to be there to have some drinks with the boys and help a candidate win. Like,
Yeah.
No, and that's the caveat. That's what Brian was talking about. He was like, you can hide behind your threads, cold emails, and he's like, that stuff actually works. But he was talking about showing up physically, like going to in-person events, being in those circles, like with people where you can actually shake their hand, being a person of value, and then just not being a fucking weirdo. So I think that's something that plays, especially in politics. Like, be there physically, be a person of value, don't be a fucking weirdo.
yeah.
Yeah. So from your experience, like I put out a tweet last night, funny enough, that said like, if you're with someone that's influential and all you're doing is fanboying, like, dude, I loved your thread. That YouTube video was great. Like, you're so cool, blah, blah, blah. Like, they're not going to want to associate with you on a friendship, relationship type level. They're going to see you as a fan of their brand. But if you come to someone and you're like, oh, what do you want to drink? Like, how's, go approach that girl. Like, anything that's way more...
It's
a good-
way out there example, but go ahead.
That's what I put in my...
Imagine being at like a political
what I put in
event.
my
You're
tw-
like, yo, go approach
Yeah,
that
okay.
girl.
Just like cool, like casual banter
Is
back
that
and forth
Pelosi?
talk. Like, yo, we going to
Milkies?
Pelosi looking bad over there. No, but that was an example that I used.
Those things be thangin'.
I was
was-
just picturing
Shout
a
out
political event where you're like with the boys.
Can we
being like,
not
yo, go
talk about
approach that.
Pelosi like that? Because that's just
Approach that girl.
I'm
There's
getting
only
weird
one,
images.
That was,
I guess two things worth
great
mentioning
sidetrack.
about Pelosi.
All right, but Tulsi,
All right. So what I was saying is, if you can approach someone with value and with influence, a politician, and you can have like a regular conversation, like, "Oh, how was your golf round?" Like, "Oh, I shot a 7 on hole 4. Like, I suck." That kind of conversation is what's going to get you that connection in that relationship and lead to the business that you tried to achieve by fanboying them and boosting their ego. So, do you want to talk about just being able to have a regular conversation with someone that has a lot of power and has something that you want, whether it's their business, their connections, their relationship? How does just being a cool person give you like a nice ROI on the relationship?
Every valuable relationship I have built has come from me not knowing who the person was. Almost
Yeah.
every single one.
Yeah.
To include my wife, by the way. Like, I have a great story on how I met her and some political propaganda, but
Talk about it.
so I will get to that eventually because it's a great story. And but the first real connection I made in politics outside of my Aunt Stacy, my family wasn't super involved in politics growing up. My dad knew I was into politics. He called the head lobbyist for Outback Steakhouse International at the time, now Bloomin' Brands, because my dad runs Carrabba's. And he's like, hey, I want to get my son tickets to P5, which is presidential debate, Republican presidential primary. And we showed up, and I sat next to this woman who had actually been the hookup for the tickets. Her name's Marianne Johnson. And we just started talking. I had no idea who she was. And as we started talking and found out that she's the political director for the Florida Chamber of Commerce. Like, she helps decide who the Florida Chamber of Commerce is going to back for their elections. But by being a normal person, talking about how I wanted to serve in the military, talking about like, hey, I'm planning on coming to FSU. At the end of the night, she said to me, when you get to Tallahassee, come to my office and we'll find something for you. And she was how I got the internship on the Romney campaign. Ended up interning with the Republican Party of Florida for a while after that. And then I ended up interning with the Florida Chamber of Commerce, which really kicked off my career. And it's all thanks to one high-quality connection that was not me fanboying. I was sitting next to this woman who, one of the sweetest, nicest, most brilliant political minds you'll ever meet. Like, one of the few people in politics who I cannot say enough good things about her. Yeah. But it was not a fanboying relationship. Same thing with my wife. I was not like fanboying my wife. And I feel like guys do this all the time. They put women on a pedestal. They put like the girl that they want to be with on a pedestal. And then they act like weirdos around them. My wife showed up to a protest that I was organizing.
So romantic.
So romantic. Very romantic. And I was like kind of interested. I just got out of this relationship. And
Didn't she have a date with somebody else?
yeah. So that's the story. She had this date with this guy that coming up that Friday, and she's like, "Yeah, I'm going on a date with." I'm not going to say his name because he still works in politics. And I'm like, he has herpes, right? Anyway, she didn't go on the date with him, and now we're married and have our second kid on the way. But looking back on it, I'm not proud about lying. I mean, who knows? It was Florida State. 1 in 4 people at Florida State has some type of STD. But look, again, it's not a fanboying situation. And I think so many times, like, people put Dan on a pedestal. People put you guys on a pedestal. And then they act like weirdos around them. Like, all the time. It happens the same thing in politics. People, have an opportunity to, and given I have pictures with politicians on my Facebook page because, it was cool to meet Mike Pence.
Yeah.
Like, that's a cool thing to do. But I remember having the conversation with my Aunt Stacy about, like, hey, I noticed that actually successful lobbyists never post pictures with these guys. And she's like, yeah, I mean, you're young right now, so do it because it's cool and it makes you feel good. But, like, long term, you're not building a relationship with somebody if you're constantly, like, just taking selfies with them and walking off. Like, you're not building a relationship with somebody if you're like, excuse me, Mr. Representative, sir, can we please do this? Because I'd like to. Like, people just get so weird. And at the end of the day, politicians are normal people. Like, most of them. Like, the Republicans in Florida are normal people. Like, they're good people. They're people that you want to go out and have a beer with or, like, play a round of golf with, have a cigar with. But you never get there if you're like, oh, it's the mayor. Like, yeah, call him Madam Mayor. Like, show respect where respect is due. Give honor to whom honor is due. But don't be a weirdo. Like, stop idolizing these people.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And I guess it's easier said than done, too, because you'll find yourself in these situations where someone you really look up to is, like, there. And I feel like just having, like, the self-awareness of it's in your best interest to approach the situation is if you're on the same playing field, right? And just to be like a normal person. And it probably takes experience. Like, maybe you could talk about, like, how when you first got into politics, you might have now matured into being able to better handle yourself around these types of people. Like, do you feel that's true?
Oh, 100%. And just networking in general, I think that's a skill that you develop over time. One, you have to stop having such a high view of men, right? And I mean, like, humans, not just like men. But you need to have a higher view of God than you have of anybody else. That really comes into play because once you realize that God created all of you, you're all made out of the same dust, you can approach people with a lot more of a normal demeanor. You also have to stop looking down on yourself. And I feel like that's one of the harder things to do. Is guys will be like, well, I can't do this because X, or I can't do this because Y. And, hey, everybody did something super, super messed up in their past. Like, every single person, every politician, every person in this room, like, we're all sinners in the hands of an angry God. And once you get over your stories that you have about yourself, you're going to be a lot more free to start building and developing those relationships.
This episode comes at a really interesting time because I believe next Friday, right? Or this upcoming week, you're going to Warrior Week, it's called.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like, I would say, based on the stories you've told, like your origin story of where, things in your life and relationships and politics, spirituality, business, they were kind of at a low point. And you found this community, you found this event that kind of lifted you out of that. So I guess speak to that experience a little bit and how, like, men or leaders in business can find communities or events similar to Warrior Week or even Warrior Week itself to really, like, level up and kind of be reborn in a sense.
Yeah. Warrior Week's interesting and a great example of not fanboying, right? So I know most of the viewers here are probably big Twitter guys, so they might not be familiar with Warrior Week. But if you spend a lot of time on Facebook over the past 10 years and you're a man who's over the age of 18, particularly if you're a married man, you've been targeted by Wake Up Warriors ads. Like, period, every man in America.
And who's the head guy at that again?
Garrett White is the head of Wake Up Warrior. Warrior Week is now a separate entity, which is run by Sam Felsafi, who is Garrett's right-hand man. So you've probably seen his ads. Cool guy, Lamborghini, G-Wagon, all the stuff that you want to see in ads. And my first Warrior event, I think I was 23 years old because I was about to have my son, or my wife was about to have my son. She was carrying him. I wasn't doing much. And I went out and I got to spend 3 days at an event called Warrior Wealth training with Garrett and Sam. And I remember the first time Garrett came into the room, and I was like, oh, it's Garrett. And, like, over the next few days, I was like, oh, Garrett's a normal guy. Like, he makes dick jokes just like everybody else. He's a normal human, right? And the same thing with Sam. And I actually get to see this because I go out and I help with Warrior Weeks now. I see people when they first see Sam for the first time, and he's one of the scariest guys you'll ever meet. Like, if you like put into an AI art software like terrifying Iranian, like, guy's huge. He's like pretty jacked. He's built. He kind of looks like he's gonna rip your throat out. He yells. But at the end of the day, he's such a nice, normal guy. And over the past few years, I've gotten to build a relationship with him and see that, like, oh, hey, Sam's just a fallen man, just like I am. But Warrior Week, yeah, definitely had a big impact on my life. I was not a Christian prior to Warrior Week. My business was not in a great place. I was really behind on my taxes. I was not closing deals like I should have been. And I went out to Warrior Week. It was a big investment. And the community that I found and the brotherhood I found of going through a painful event like that is like nothing else I found with any other group. I mean,
besides Klein Ascension.
Way more than Klein Ascension. I mean, look, I love you guys, and I love Klein Ascension. I think you guys are doing something awesome. But there's a difference between like standing in front of a bunch of men and admitting the worst thing you've ever done in your entire life, and doing like typical business, typical business work.
Like, we'll just stand up on a call and admit we didn't control test. Quick question. And everybody's like, no. You guys are getting the deep dark secrets. So
Yeah,
a little bit different.
No, it's like deep dark secrets, and it's true physical pain. And I mean, if you watch like the Warrior Week videos, like you'll see like me. I'm pretty sure there's a scene of me just like sobbing my eyes out, like with men that I just met for the first time. Men who are, by the way, like my best friends now. Like they're like, I call them brother. Like we hang up calls and it's like, I love you. Yeah. And we actually mean it. It's a very powerful thing. So quick plug. I don't get anything off this, but warriorweek.com. Warrior Week 70 is next week. It's sold out. The next 2 events are sold out, but there should be 2 more events in 2023 if anybody is interested in that.
Yeah, stemming off of that, obviously not as intense as Warrior Week. How does somebody, we talk about this a lot, how does somebody surround themselves with a community of people that are in the same wavelength, the same mindset as them? Because like we always talk about, the biggest mindset shift you can have is being around other people that achieve things that they consider normal, that you consider outstanding. For example, running a really successful, profitable business to someone just starting seems unfathomable, unrealistic, but to the people you're around, it's completely normal. So it just switches your mindset to think that this kind of stuff is achievable, it's normal. So can you just speak to how someone can surround themselves with that kind of a community?
Clientascension.com. Yeah, one, don't be a weirdo. Like it keeps coming back to that, right? Like, have to be a normal person, and you have to like be somebody that other people want to hang out around. And maybe your value is not that you run a business, but maybe your value is that you know about cigars. Maybe your value is that you know about wine. Maybe your value is that you have something interesting to talk about, right? Maybe your value is that you're a good listener and you make people feel good about themselves because you can listen.
And I'm sorry to butt in. I honestly think the answer to that question is pretty simple. You just have to do it. Like, if you want to be a better man in all areas of your life, which it sounds like Warrior Week is helping you do, you just join. Like, people in that group, based on what you were just saying about taxes and whatnot, we're probably all in like a vastly different financial position. But you were just like, okay, I'm going to do it. Like, if I want to be in a group of agency owners, you join Klein Ascension. You just do it. If I want to be in, like, the Republican scene in Tampa, Florida, I'd go to some type of convention. Like, it's all public information. I feel like it's just like actually taking that step and just getting over like, hey, I'm not going to be on the sidelines anymore. I just need to do it. It's really not that like complicated of an answer. You just got to actually do the thing.
Yeah, 100%. Nobody wants to do the thing, right? Or they do the thing and they end up acting like a weirdo. Showing up at Republican events, like there's always somebody who's there and is like wearing an American flag for their clothing or dressed as a Minuteman and like cool. Like you'll get pictures. Like, I don't. Have you guys ever been to CPAC?
No, I want
Okay,
to
so there's a huge conservative political action conference. Used to go to that, have crazy stories from it because you have a whole bunch of college kids who are all crazy Republicans who are just getting drunk out of their minds. Really, like
America.
Look, yeah, sorry. If I was a Democrat operative, I'd go and just record that because everybody who goes to CPAC ends up like in politics eventually. Most people do. But you have to go and you have to be a normal person and you have to not be a weirdo and you end up. I ended up at parties with people at CPAC who are now state senators, state representatives.
Doing keg stands with Ron DeSantis.
They're on like the governor's staff, and you go and you meet people and you have a drink and you act like a normal person. Like that's the biggest thing is whatever you want to do. You want to get into politics? Great. Go find the next political event in your town. Show up. Don't be a weirdo. Like, you want to, like, get into businesses? Yeah. Like, cool. Like, join Client Ascension. Like, start talking to people on Twitter. Like, I was friends with, Dan on Twitter before I ever ended up in Client Ascension. I think, I bought Christian's book and was, like, talking about how cool it was before I joined Client Ascension. Like, that's
also, just to butt in there, I'm pretty sure you didn't even have a sales call.
No, I didn't have a sales call.
We were just like, who is this guy? And Daniel was like, oh, I know him from Twitter. He's cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I texted, I was texting Dan because I wanted to be with some other agency owners because there's not a lot of agency guys. There's one other agency guy who's in Warrior Week, and he's in a different group than I am. And I was really looking for some agency-specific help. So I'm like, Dan keeps talking about this thing. Like, let me send him some, like, Twitter messages. And I'm like, look, my agency's a little bit past this like starting point. He's like, well, we have Mastermind. And I'm like, cool. Like, how much is it? And he's like, this much. I'm like, cool, send me an invoice. Like, I'm done. Which is the other thing. Like, a lot of you guys could probably skip a sales call. Like, if you want to do something, like, short of like, obviously barriers to entry are important. I think that's something Dan's talked about recently. Like, hey, let's make sure people joining aren't like full of crap about like their numbers. But like, if you want to do something, don't make the salesperson sell you on it. Like, that's just annoying.
Yeah, I think the biggest change that I had was Andre, freshman year of college, approached me about doing a podcast. And instead of like, oh, let me think about it, let me do my due diligence, like blah, 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 I just said yes. Like, I had no clue what a podcast would entail, no clue how it would go. I didn't even know if I was going to be good at it. I just said yes, and we started out with probably the worst podcast episode of all time in the incubator. And it just evolved into a friendship, a business, this podcast here today. So it's all about just blindly saying yes, right? Just going for it.
Yeah, and just to build on that, every successful businessman I know has a hard time saying no. Like, that's like one of the most universal qualities of success in business is people who are terrible at saying no. And by the way, like, long term, that's not sustainable. No. But getting started, say yes to everything. Yeah. And I did a thread on this recently. Of like, people are like, I need to find my niche, and this isn't in my niche, and I need to be in this niche. And it's like, hey, if you have under 10K MRR, you don't have a niche. Like, shut up, say yes to every client. Yeah. I don't care. Like, can you do that thing? Cool. Do like, say yes, and eventually you get into a problem like I have where it's like, oh, I said yes to too many things. I have to figure this out and like build some systems, which Andre's helping me with. But like, the more you say yes, the better and faster your business is going to grow, period. And the better and faster you're going to grow in general.
What am I? There you go.
No, is he good? Yeah, okay. This actually segues into something that I wanted to talk more about, which is like systems and operations, right? So you talk about like going out to these events, meeting people, having fun, having dinner, connecting with like-minded people. And on the back end, you still have a business that needs to run. You have clients that you need to deliver services for. You have daily tasks that need to get done. So one thing that I'm super impressed by you with is like, you're very well read, right? You have like really good systems within your business, which of course, like, we're working on those together as well, like to just kind of compare what works for each other. But like, talk about how you're able to balance both being like outgoing at events, meeting people, networking, and also operating an actual business? Because I feel like that it's a tough balance, especially like you're on your own in a sense.
It's a tough balance if you make it a tough balance. And I think that's one of the biggest things is I have an obsessive personality, and a lot of very successful people I know in business have obsessive personalities. I've always had an obsessive personality. So I'm very, very obsessed with reading. If you guys have seen my office, it's like 90% bookshelves. I make time every morning. I wake up, before my wife does, before my son does, I go in go do my morning routine, which, by the way, like your morning routine, if it becomes a superstition, like I totally agree with Hormozy on that. Like having one is great, especially if you have a wife and kids to like, hey, like spend some time on yourself before you like start the chaos of the day. But I prioritize those things. And I also specifically deprioritize stuff that I don't like doing. And I do that more and more. And the more I do that, the happier I am. I have a laundry service now because I hate doing laundry. I have a maid who comes because I hate cleaning. And I hate like making my wife clean when I hate cleaning. It's not about like trying to like strategically find a balance. It's about making sure that you have the bandwidth that you need by not doing the things that you don't want to do. Same way I've lost weight, by the way. I stopped eating foods that I don't like. I eat steak, like basically every meal. I eat steak and a carb. And I've lost like 10 pounds doing it. I hate cardio, so I lift and I go on long walks. And by the way, this can be terrible advice because if you're like, oh, I hate working or I hate waking up early or like, I hate eating like protein. Like, okay, you need to work on yourself.
Yeah.
You need to work on those things.
Nobody hates making money, though.
Yeah, nobody. Actually, people do hate making money. Like, there's so many people who hate making money, dude. Why do you think that entrepreneurship is so rare? It's because people hate making money. Like,
I think they hate the work that's associated with it and like the ownership you have to take in order to be decent at entrepreneurship. But they don't hate making. Like, everybody gets that dopamine hit when you see a check come through. I think so.
I mean, then why do people go spend 6 figures on college to work at a $40,000 a year job? Like, they don't actually want to make
any better.
I was gonna say
I
it's
don't-
the system. You're giving the most risky unqualified loan to like 18-year-olds because it's what the 30-year-olds and the 40-year-olds and the 50-year-olds that taught them K through 12 told them was the right path. I think that's more of like a chalk it up to the game thing than those people not liking money.
I respectfully disagree because I think people make as much money as they want to make at the end of the day. Because there's plenty of talented people who could go make more money. They're happy and they're content with their lives.
Yeah, they're just content. They don't want to advance. They have no motivation.
Ambition. It's an ambition.
It's an ambition thing, and it really comes down to like, hey, what do you want in life? Because I genuinely believe this, and not in like a woo-woo law of attraction thing. I believe that you will get whatever you want in your life. You just actually have to want it. And most people don't even know what they want. Most people don't know that they can want more than they have currently, and they don't work for it. So I agree with you. There's a work ethic component, but I think there's tons of people out there, and it's one of the hardest things to deal with as an entrepreneur. By the way, this ties into hiring. There's so many entrepreneurs who won't hire because they're like, oh, this person is going to steal my business, and this person's like, they don't want that responsibility, dude.
Yeah.
Like, they just want like a steady paycheck. And getting past that point of not everybody wants what you want will change your game in hiring.
And it's hard to like conceptualize that because it's not natural to you to think that way.
Yeah.
And I think that's why like for us, it's like, who doesn't want to make more money? Like that makes no sense. But like you said, you brought up some good examples of like people are just content with collecting a paycheck and getting by with a 9 to 5, which is completely fine.
Yeah.
It's whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say Gary Vee did a video where he said some of his billionaire friends are way more miserable than his friends that make $40,000 and play soccer twice a week and watch sports and play video games. And it's just to each their own, I guess, right?
Yeah. You have to decide what you want. And I mean, I've worked with 2 billionaire clients, billionaire with a B. And both of them wanted that lifestyle. And I remember talking to one of my mentors who was helping me on the project with one of said billionaire clients. I'm like, man, I'd love that life. And he's like, hey, there's a lot of exit points on that road. Like, You will get offered so many opportunities to have a lifestyle business, and you have to decide the overall lifestyle that you want. The issue is most people want a lifestyle. Most people actually want, not say they want, because everybody says they want a Lamborghini. Everybody says that they want to be a billionaire. Everybody says they want to have, like, go on a yacht. What they actually want is probably pretty close to what they have. And the other thing is you have to deal with the question of what are you going to do when you get what you want?
Yeah.
Now it's getting deep.
Yeah. Wait. You have something?
You go ahead.
I was gonna just do a quick pivot and just like a nerdy little pivot to direct mail.
Dude, I was going to bring that up too. That's
Because
great.
all right, so some background. He does direct mail in a really cool way. Has a great data set going back to targeting. I did it for my brother's company, so he doesn't really have like a company, but he does masonry. Does really good like stonework, concrete, brick, tile, all of that stuff. And I was like, let's just test this out. It costs not a lot of money. I mean, I won't say prices or whatnot, but well over a 20x return on investment within 2 weeks. So I feel like it's just one of those blue ocean things, and I want to like hear your take on who it actually works for. Is it just like a B2C play? Is it also B2B?
Do you want to just expand on direct mail quick so it's very clear?
Oh yeah, so direct mail, like physical mail that you would receive in your mailbox, where it looks like on the outside it's handwritten, inside is a letter where he knows his stuff when it comes to design and just short and sweet copy, similar to a good cold email script, pretty short form, conversational, plain text, clear call to action. But yeah, we're talking about like literally like a piece of mail in an envelope. It sounds archaic, but man, it, like from my short experience, it works. So
Yeah, it's just a form of lead gen. It's just like cold calling. It's just like cold email. So direct mail. Yeah, talk about the opportunity there.
Yeah, so direct mail rips. Like, I have not seen it fail yet. We're doing a big direct mail campaign for my wife's company this week. And I'll be very clear with the price. It's $1.69 a letter. Letterlobster.com if you're interested. I'm really into. I got really into Jordan Peterson when I started my business, which is why everything's Lobster, if you were wondering. But direct mail is a opportunity that people are missing out on because everyone's like, oh, well, nobody else does it. Nobody else does it, and that's why it works. Like, how many cold emails do you get in a day? Like, a lot. Yeah.
You just have a blue ocean strategy.
Yeah. It's blue ocean 100%. And by the way, it doesn't look like a sales letter, which is why it gets open and it gets into the house.
In terms of marketing in general, based on my short experience with this, once again, the positive intent response rate is like 95%. Like, you got like 20 people asking for a quote. Only one person was just like, hey, I just wanted to like somebody reached out to tell him he wasn't interested, not even in a dickish way, probably just somebody who had too much time on their hands. But everybody else was like, this is so cool. It was handwritten. I really appreciate you taking the time to do that. The letter was nice. It's good to see like a local company doing this. Yeah. Like, extremely high positive intent rate. And then I also, just circling back to my question beforehand, is this just a B2C play or can it work for B2B as well?
It needs to be a high ticket offer is what I will say about this, but it doesn't necessarily have to be B2C. We're doing it actually for a client. He's dropping the letters in the mailbox tomorrow, B2B play. He has a staffing and recruiting firm, and it works because people don't get letters and people don't get handwritten letters. So what happens is a robot literally holds a pen and handwrites their name on the envelope, handwrites everything, and then an actual normal stamp goes on it, not like one of these business class like mass stamp things that happens. So it looks like a normal letter and it gets opened because it's like being a normal person and not a weirdo, kind of.
Yes. Just to cut you off, sorry to cut you off, but just to interrupt, the copywriter in me wants to know like what goes into the copy on the letter that invokes a positive response.
The handwriting on the outside. That's literally it.
So that gets you the open.
That gets you the open.
And then what's the body copy that gets someone to respond back?
So it's personalized body copy. It's, hey, it's very personal. Every single one of these is, hey, my name is blank. I do blank. There's not like a cheesy first line or anything. It's just meant to feel personal. We put in a phone number that they can call or text to make it feel even more personal. We're using open phone for a lot of people, but you could run it through like a Go High Level Twilio number 2. This is what we do. Some pictures of the job, if that applies, like you're doing high-end pools like my wife or masonry. That's really all that goes into it is, hey, this is what we do. This is who we are. If we can help, that's great. Same thing with our roofing client. Hey, just a neighbor trying to reach out to another neighbor. I do think it works better for local business offers than like national business offers.
Nice
but
too. You have that like trust built up.
Yeah.
Like, hey, I'm reaching out and I'm serving this community.
Mm-hmm.
So is there a hook? Like, are you looking for new roofing, or is it just like, if you're interested in roofing, here's my number?
So the hook for the roofing company was basically free roof inspection, and he'll bring you Whataburger if he does your roof. Because
See, that's cool.
That's awesome.
That's cool.
He's in Texas. He eats Whataburger all the time. We have the same accountant, and that's how he ended up working with me in the first place. So the going joke has been Whataburger with him. So he'll inspect your roof and bring you Whataburger for lunch.
Love that.
My wife's offer is just like, hey, like, one, we know for a fact you have a pool. Like, we know for a fact you live on this island. We know for a fact, like, we know these things about you. We work on this island all the time. You probably ask your neighbors. One of them's probably worked with us. But the entire offer is like, hey, if you're thinking about remodeling your pool, give us a call. Text us.
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
Super simple.
So
also,
go
just to
ahead.
cut you off, I actually got it.
Dan, leaving us
Wow.
2 for 2 on the exits. Come on.
Skipped Bible study.
Jeez.
Heathen.
No, all good.
Great seeing you, brother.
Good stuff. So I want to get really into the marketing trenches here. So there's like a pyramid of buyers. It's Chet Holmes, right? There's like 2 or 3% of the people that are in the market for a new pool. There's another percentage of people that aren't in the market yet, but you could persuade them. And then there's like a bunch that are not in the market at all. Do you think these direct mail campaigns capture the people that are actively looking for a new pool? Or do you think there are people that get the letters, don't know they need a new pool, and then they're like, oh, yeah, I actually do want a new pool? Like, do you think there's people that get those letters that you turn them from not even thinking about it to wanting to order a new pool or a new roof from your client?
So I don't think that we're hitting the people who are like, oh, I can't imagine getting a new pool right now. Now, maybe there could be some people in that audience, only because pool remodeling is not an urgent thing for your house. Like, yeah, maybe you need a new finish. Maybe you've thought about it a few times before. And like, this is that opportunity. This is that like little push that you need to get over the line.
So you're hitting the people that already know they need it, and you're just bringing it to the top of mind.
Yeah, basically. So our data sets, particularly for home service businesses, are great because we're able to not just target, hey, this person has a pool. We're targeting, this person has a pool, their house is over $1 million, and they have at least 50% equity in the house. So we know for a fact that this person can afford a new pool. We know for a fact this person has a pool. And we know for a fact that this person is within the service area because, we have to put the address on the envelope. It's a really cool data set to play with. And same thing with masonry. We targeted houses that were over $1 million and had at least 40% equity, I think was what we did for Joe's business. And it works well because you know that the person has money. You know the person can't afford it. Now, do we know if that person just had a pool remodel done last week? No, but you don't know that when you run a Facebook ad either. The only thing you know that with is like intent-based marketing, so running Google ads, which kills for home service businesses. Like, if you own a home service business or you work with home service businesses and they're not on Google ads, like, get them on Google ads. I don't care if you're not a Google ads guy. Google ads are not that hard. You're doing your clients a misservice if you aren't doing some intent-based marketing there, but it's 100% you're targeting people who could potentially buy a new pool.
Yeah.
But, do they want it right now? Do they not? Who knows? But I guarantee you they remember the handwritten letter in a year when they want it.
Very interesting.
Yeah, you never know. Like, that's the whole thing with like sales and marketing, right? You have to actually ask the question. And that's like the hurdle that people have like working with clients one-on-one at our cold email lead generation agency, like clients sometimes have a really hard time understanding why we're reaching out to people that might not be interested. And it's like, that's the whole point of outreach. Like, you have to actually ask the question. Like, we could sit here and build a list and a targeting strategy that gives us all the indication that they could potentially be a good fit. But in reality, you only need a very small percentage of the people you reach out to convert to make it an ROI.
Mm-hmm. My wife needs one pool to convert because
Wow.
a pool remodel is like
High ticket.
$50,000 to $100,000. A roof is $10,000 to $20,000. A masonry job is, I'm not going to throw out his business numbers without asking him, but like it's a high ticket offer.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing is if you have a high ticket offer, it's way easier to sell. That's why I don't, love you ecom guys. Like, it's why I don't like work with ecom people. Is a lot of times we're talking, with the exception of, what's his name, Brian?
Bro.
Who's the high ticket ecom guy?
Brooke,
He sells like
Brooke.
saunas for a lot of money.
Yeah. Like Brooke, like, exception to the rule, like, yeah, you can do some really cool marketing there. But yeah, short of running like search ads, you're not going to know for a fact the person wants what you want, which is why you should be running search ads.
Yeah, and another takeaway from this is I feel like a lot of people get a preconceived notion in their mind like, oh, this will not work for my business. And then I ask why, and they say because it doesn't sound like it would. I'm like, you at least try it. Like, from my experience, like cold email, everyone's like, oh, this offer's not going to work for cold email. It's so abstract. And I'm like, that's probably the offer that's going to work the best because it's so abstract, right?
Yeah.
Like direct mail. People are like, that's 1900s archaic. It's not going to work. You do it, it does really well. So if you're a marketer, I always say err on the side of go ahead and try it. And then if it doesn't work, fine, at least you tried. But don't just sit there and say, oh, cold email won't work, direct mail won't work, and then not try it just because you have a preconceived bias. Like, for example, some of our best converting cold email campaigns are like, we have a client that sells Zoom video hockey training to youth hockey teams. And youth hockey directors are not getting cold emailed like a CEO of an e-com brand does, and they do really, really well because they're like, oh yeah, a hockey director gets an email from a guy that was a D1 hockey player, and he offers to train the program's players. They're like, yeah, let's talk about it. Or one of the students in Klein Ascension does mixology events for corporate events, so she'll hop on a Zoom call with a corporate event and show them how to make a cocktail live on Zoom. And everyone's like, oh, this will never work with cold email, and I'm like, have you tried it? They're like, no. I'm like, so let's try it. And then it works. So I always say to err on the side of, once again, trying something and failing as opposed to just sitting there and saying, oh, it's not going to work and not trying it.
Yeah, it comes back to say yes. Like, say yes more, and you're going to have more opportunities, especially for beginners. Like, right, eventually you get to a point where you're like, yeah, I have to start saying no to some stuff. And that's the hardest thing to do, is transition from saying yes to everything to saying no to everything. But a lot of people see, like, the Hormozis of the world, and I love Hormozi, but you got to realize that the advice that works for somebody who's already successful is a lot different from the advice that works for somebody who is just trying to get started.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel like the other thing to keep in mind here is, like, don't be afraid to fail, right? Like, don't be afraid to get that rejection. And like Christian was saying, you'll never know unless you try. And from what I've found, like, my experience with marketing is typically when people don't believe that something is going to work, it's actually the thing that works. And if you just follow what everyone else says to do, you're not going to stand out. And that's all marketing is. Like, how are you going to stand out? How do you expect to stand out if you're just copying what everyone else is doing? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And the boring shit works the best. Like, the richest people in the world make doorknobs and glass and wheels.
100%.
They're not manufacturing the next AI cloud software. Like, yeah, granted, there are billionaires that do that stuff, but the majority of people that are in the cushy country club driving their Bentleys, their Rolls Royces, have a generational, I don't know, wood business or granite business, right?
One of my clients sells tomatoes. I'm not kidding. He's not. I don't like do marketing for the tomato company. I do his political stuff because he has a lot of political business. But he owns a tomato company, and he lives an incredible lifestyle that I think most people watching this video would envy. But he runs a tomato business. Like, it's not this super sexy industry. It's tomatoes.
So what you're saying is you don't have to start an agency.
You don't have to start an agency. Like, I almost said this to you guys this morning when we were talking about my wife's revenue numbers with the pool company. Like, I don't know, go find a home service business. Like, there's a guy on, and I terrible at remembering Twitter names apparently, but there's a guy on Twitter who does like window washing, and he's built this huge business doing window washing. Super boring, makes a ton of money. My accountant is acquiring lawn care companies right now because lawn care companies make a ton of money and are really easy to market for, by the way, like, and have very low churn rates.
Yo, let's buy a lawn care company and do direct mail.
Dude, lawn care company direct mail, like pool service businesses direct mail, like crush. And that's probably the one exception to high ticket, right? When I'm talking about high ticket. When I talk about high ticket, I'm talking lifetime value. I'm not talking like
one transaction.
One transaction. Now, pools, obviously, that's one transaction with some lifetime value on the back end because you do servicing. But
okay, this is all great conversation. We're running a little short on time. There's one topic that I really want to get into, especially considering the guests that we have on today, which is politics and how that, I guess, has an effect on business, because I feel like business capitalism, like, it all weaves into the current political scene, right? And I feel like you are very qualified to talk about this. So a lot of young entrepreneurs in America are listening to this episode, and I feel like as entrepreneurs, a lot of times we try to put politics off to the side and kind of stay within our own space, within our own tunnel of focus, because we don't think it's worth our time to pay attention to. But speaking to young entrepreneurs in America that are out there, I guess, what are some things that they should be considering or looking out for in the next few years?
I'll start by saying that if you are using politics as an excuse to not do something in your business, that you're making a mistake. So I think a lot of times people who start getting involved in politics see the doom and gloom, and they're like, oh, well, it's not a good time to buy a business right now. It's not a good time to start a business right now. Like, oh, the economy's crashing. Like, bro, the economy is a macro. Your business is a micro. Like, stop using that as an excuse to not be successful. But politics is the steroid of networking, especially if you're a young entrepreneur. You start showing up at political events, you start meeting people at your local chamber of commerce, which I know chambers of commerce are like this antiquated thing in a lot of young entrepreneurs' minds, because they're like, I'm on the internet, I do all this cool stuff. Like, if you're a digital marketing person and you're fun to hang out with, if you join your chamber of commerce and start going to events, you'll get business. If you start going to political events, you'll get business. Like, there are people who are involved in politics at very high levels tend to have a lot of money. Now, given there's people who show up to like local Republican meetings who don't have two pennies to rub together, and they'll try and sell you on like doing marketing for their business for free or for like a cut, and they've never built anything and they can't close to save their life. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the people who actually cut the big checks for politicians, which, by the way, is public record. Like, go on your local supervisor of elections website, and you can find like the people who donate to politics. The people who donate to politics are people you want to do business for and with, because one, they have money, two, they have time, and three, they probably don't know anything about digital, like in almost every case.
Yeah, I feel like once you're on Twitter, you think that your client base needs to come from Twitter.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, you could get business from a local friend, chamber of commerce, someone on LinkedIn, someone from SEO that finds your website. Like, I would say money Twitter is what, like 0.0001% of your market for digital business. So if you just expand your horizons by like 2 degrees away from money Twitter into local business, other avenues on social media, you will get business that no one else is getting from money Twitter, simply because you're going after a market, you know, as a young entrepreneur that no one else is pursuing.
Dan is the closest thing I have to a money Twitter generated client. Like, doing that direct mail campaign for him. Everything else is referrals, because, and by the way, this is my other tip. If you're like currently in college and you're like, hey, you know, I want to go into business later, go intern for your state legislature. Like, you will make so many crazy business connections, like ridiculous connections. My pastor makes this comment all the time. He's like, you know everyone. And I'm like, this is not like abnormal for me.
Okay, so give a good example of a connection that you made that led to a really cool experience, like tickets to somewhere, access to somewhere, some kind of cool event that stemmed from a connection that you made in the political space.
Oh, so I would say kind of the thing that makes me most happy with like political connections is being able to serve people in a way that I like can't monetize. And that really goes back to not being a weirdo and not theme of this podcast, don't be a weirdo. Not everything has to be about making money, and the less you're focused on making more money and the more you're focused on serving, the better off your life is
You'll
going to
end
be.
up making more money.
You'll end up making more money. So, good example of this was actually through jiu-jitsu. I became friends with this guy, Adam Johnson, and long story short, Adam Johnson went to the Capitol on January 6th and picked up Nancy Pelosi's podium. But because of political connections, I was able to hook him up with
Bigney.
Yeah, David Bigney, my criminal law client. And because of that, I got to help keep a father of 5 from going to prison for a very, very long time. He only ended up having to do about 60 days. And that built a solid relationship. Just moving forward on that, his wife had some medical issues recently, and he told me about it. And I happened to have, actually through the same guy who, his network makes mine look like, he went to Harvard Law. He was top of his class at Harvard Law. He went to Harvard Law with like Elizabeth Warren. No, this is Jonathan Kilman, who's a business partner of mine. Great guy, very cool. And because I knew that he had the connection, I was able to call up and get her into an eye hospital that was able to fix her health issue. So it's hard to point to like, hey, this is a cool event. It's like, yeah, I got to go as a VIP to Trump's 2020 announcement. Very cool, other than the fact that there was no alcohol and you had to sit waiting for like 5 hours after getting through Secret Service, which was painful. It was great people watching, though. The crazy people dancing on the floor during doing YMCA, it was insane. I have a video of that somewhere. But you will get cool opportunities and you'll get to meet cool people the more you put yourself out there and the more you provide real value. Trying to think of like something that is like a lifestyle thing that like had that impact.
Like
but
yacht club, something really crazy. I don't know if there is one.
I don't know, man. Like, I'm sure there's some cool stuff that I've done, but and this is going to sound like snobby, and I don't mean it to sound snobby. The longer you work and the longer you build these networks, the more natural these opportunities seem. And you start to get to a point where you say, like, oh, hey, I got to do this. And people are like, whoa, that's insane. And you're like, that's like a kind of normal thing for me. Like, I guess this was kind of a cool moment in politics, and it happened because a good friend of mine who hopefully will become the chairman of Republican Party of Florida this year. If any state REC members are listening to this, you can message me and I can tell you who I support. But he got me VIP tickets to go see Mike Pence and go meet Mike Pence when he was the VP. Mike Pence happened to be a Fiji, which is my fraternity. And so I, walked up to him. I gave him the fraternity grip. He's like, he gave it back to me, and he's like, very nice. I'm like, yes, sir.
That's awesome.
That was a cool moment for me. But yeah, I mean, I've gotten to do a lot of really cool things that, private helicopter ride out to Catalina Island with Warrior Week was really cool. I can't point to anything specific, but I've gotten to live a very full and cool life.
Dude, you just mentioned 6 different ones.
Yeah, I know. But again, it starts to become normal, right?
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, because the more normal these things seem, the less of a weirdo you act like.
Yeah.
You're
not out of place.
I'm sure I was acting like a weirdo at P5 when I was 17 years old at a president. Oh, I know for a fact I was acting like a weirdo because I ran up to the stage and was like, Ron Paul, you're my hero. You're just the best. And he's like, get this freak away from me. Or another cool one I got to do was there was a private Jimmy Buffett concert. I grew up in Florida, so love Jimmy Buffett. Got to go to a private Jimmy Buffett concert. Right up on the stage, Jimmy Buffett signed my ticket. My dad's been a Jimmy Buffett fan his entire life and has never gotten that close to Jimmy Buffett.
Wow.
So there's lots of cool stuff. But again, it didn't come from like actively seeking those opportunities and being a weirdo and being like, "Hey, can I do this? Can I? Please,
Yeah, it's never
please?"
like, oh, can I please come? It's like you just get the invitation.
Yeah,
Because if you ask, they'd be like, no.
yeah. Now sometimes it is like, "Hey, I'm working with X group, like going to P5, right?" My dad made the call and made the ask. But
Yeah.
it wasn't like, oh my gosh, can I please do this? This is like the coolest thing. And it was like, hey, I'd like to do this.
Yeah, tell the example of Weitzman with the Gronk situation at the Syracuse game. Like, how did we approach that to make
Dude, we have a lot of examples of like what one connection can do for you. I mean, it's pretty cool. Like, this is another example. Like, we met you through Klein Ascension. We ended up playing at still my favorite golf course of all time, which is a private country club that you're a member at. So that was like our first time meeting in real life, and now this. But the one Christian's mentioning specifically is back in our hometown. In my hometown, Binghamton, New York, there's like a business mogul. His name's Adam Weitzman. He's blown up recently on social media. And when we started our podcast back in college, he was one of the guys that we thought would be cool to interview. And similar to you and similar to a lot of people we've actually done interviews with, he had rarely done podcast interviews. And that kind of like opened the door for Christian and I to get invited to like a Syracuse basketball game, right? Where Syracuse was playing Duke. And he hooked it up with really good tickets, which was in itself like already cool. And then Adam had attended the game with a special guest, and his name was Rob Gronkowski, who, as football fans, Christian and I were like really like, oh shit, like this is cool. Like Adam, the guy that brought us here, is also here with Rob Gronkowski. And long story short, we ended up going to a private steak dinner after the game with Rob and all of his brothers and Adam and Coach Boeheim. Like, it was just a crazy experience that just resulted from like not being out of place interviewing this billionaire just in his office.
Yeah. But I wanted to touch on how we approached the situation, right? Because we knew the game was coming up. We knew he was connected with Syracuse and the coach. We weren't like, Adam, can you give us free tickets to the game? We said, hey, the Duke game is coming up. How can we go about getting tickets? Just to bring the idea up to him. We were expecting, he'll plug us with cheaper seats than usual. Instead, he said Merry Christmas, and there were 2 tickets in our email inbox from their secretary or something. We didn't flat out ask him for them. We said, how can we get tickets? And sure enough, he gave us the tickets. Leading up to the game, we said, hey, is there anything, like, are we meeting up at any point before or after the game to just say hi and, spend some time with you? He said, you're on the guest list for a steak dinner after with Rob Gronkowski. And we're like, holy shit, this is insane. And it didn't come by, it's like a mixture of what I'm saying not to do by pressing and asking, and what you're saying just comes. It's like a middle ground where you approach it naturally, right? Like, you're not like, hey, can I meet Ron DeSantis next week? You're like, oh, is there any way I can get into the rally? And someone who's connected with the rally might just come out and say, oh, here's a few tickets to meet Ron DeSantis, right? It's like a middle ground of asking for it but not being pushy.
Yeah, and I think that's the right way to do it. And by the way, asking for it without being pushy, without any expectations, right? Because that's what you did there is you said, hey, do you know how we can go about getting tickets? And there's so many people who are like, hey, can I get free tickets?
Yeah.
Like, be willing to pay your own way. Like, if you really want to do something, be willing to pay for it. Like, that's another key to success and it's why I'm convinced, and I don't know if you guys have this opinion too, I'm convinced that the best salespeople are the ones who are easiest to close.
Definitely. Awesome, man. Well, that wraps it, I think, for us, just short on time. This was an awesome conversation with Jennings. The thing that I love about podcasting is, like, we've had conversations before. We did a Bible study this morning. Like, we've interacted before, and, like, I feel like I just learned so much more about you and your experiences and the value that you provide to the world. So for everyone listening, that's either in politics or in business, in entrepreneurship, in the money Twitter space, how can they find you, follow you, and get involved with the stuff that you're doing?
So you can find me on every social media platform at Jennings Lawton, Lawton. I don't know if there's going to be subtitles on this, but
yeah, we'll have it in the YouTube description.
My last name is DePriest, not Lawton, which was a going thing. There was a Florida political magazine that only ever saw me on Twitter, so he thought the writer thought my last name was Lawton for a while. Kind of funny in hindsight, but yeah, that's the best way to connect with me is see what I'm doing. I pretty active on Twitter. I've become more active on Twitter, working with the Launch Social guys to get some of my short form content out there. But Twitter's really my hub nowadays, so find me there.
Sweet. Thanks so much for coming on, dude. This was a fun time.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for the cigar,
Yes,
by the
sir.
way. What are you smoking?
The Olivas Series V. I forgot the name of
It's the Melania.
the Melania. Yeah.
Great cigar if you're looking. It's a quick cigar plug.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, that does it.
Let's wrap.
Thanks. guys.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Sweet.